Last weekend, we got a major tip-off from Phil Spencer himself that there are some major changes coming to Microsoft's business model as far as the Xbox brand is concerned. As someone who grew up in the midst of the Triforce console war between Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox, it is absolutely crazy that we're finally getting to the point where consoles are becoming completely obsolete. A well-substantiated leak has stated that Xbox exclusives such as Hi-Fi Rush and even mainline titles like the Halo Master Chief Collection will be available on PlayStation. This is absolutely unheard of when looking at the complete exclusivity of consoles in the past. These rumors even talk about new games becoming cross-platform, such as the soon-to-be-released Indiana Jones title and Bethesda's latest title, Starfield. What could this mean mid-console generation? Well, I think it's an obvious testament to the fact that Microsoft is much more of a software company than a hardware company at this point when it comes to the gaming space. The fact that most people that grew up in the console era game on PC at this point means Microsoft has to shift its priorities in the face of an obviously lost console war. I'm sorry all you Xbox Andes out there, but PlayStation won this war a generation ago. And honestly, both companies are losing the console war. In the lifetime of both the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles, it is true that PlayStation has nearly sold double the amount of consoles that Xbox has. But in total, Sony hasn't even sold 50 million consoles in the lifetime of this current generation. If you compare that to the major life cycle of PlayStations in the past, as well as like popular Nintendo consoles, it's a fairly underperforming console in general. Honestly, the supply shortages that happened at the beginning of this console generation probably contribute to this to a certain extent, but I think it's definitely more of a sign of the times. Nintendo has proven that niche markets are really the only way to capture consumers' desire for specific hardware in this modern era. The technology that exists in both the mainline powerhouse consoles is essentially indistinguishable. By participating in console gaming, you are guaranteed a more optimized position most of the time, but you're also essentially playing a game on a PC with software limitations built into it. Most people no longer want the restriction of playing on an individual branded console, and with Steam and other platforms creating hardware that allows people to play PC games in the same way that consoles do, the space is becoming much more amorphous. Honestly, this is better for the consumer. The less hardware restrictions there are for games, the more exposure people will have to the vast library of games that exist. The more exposure and availability there is, the less likely it will be that games will become unavailable due to corporate gatekeeping as well. Due to being the underdogs in the console war, Microsoft has now pivoted to embrace the philosophy of when everybody plays, we all win, and have created the most participated in subscription gaming service that has ever existed. With over 33 million subscribers to Game Pass, the business model of the console makes very little sense, especially when Microsoft is responsible for the operating system that runs most people's gaming setups. PlayStation maintains brand loyalty because of their exclusives, but Xbox has largely just been a competitor because of their past reputation. Their software innovations have led to greater availability in terms of old game libraries, and it was inevitable that this type of business model would be the future of the company. Ultimately, this is a great thing because it means a lower cost barrier to what would otherwise be exclusive gaming. The market can decide a game's value much quicker, and having multiple options for most third-party games will create a lot more revenue for developers and gaming companies in general. It's about time that the middleman was cut out. And it's honestly impressive that it hasn't happened before this point, especially considering the pivots in business practices that Xbox has tried to make in the past, becoming an all-in-one entertainment system. One of the downsides of this is that owning a hardware copy of a game will become more and more obscure as well. But given that there are ways of storing software more efficiently, and the fact that modern games have become essentially indistinguishable from PC software, game preservation will be easier, and availability to games through other avenues will become more common. I know it's hard to see what used to be the quintessential gaming experience changing so dramatically, but ultimately this just means that the consumer gets what they want more effectively. With the rising cost of producing games, The sustainability of current gaming prices will also be left in the dust of inflation. Is it really better to buy a game for $70 before knowing exactly how good of an experience it's going to be? With software like Game Pass, it becomes increasingly easier to try a product without being super financially invested. Being able to purchase the game separately will still be an option, especially for developers that have a reputation. It may seem like the subscription service provides less ownership, but it's actually a good mediator in between purchasing decisions. Honestly, given the decision of certain companies to delete access to digital stores as well, means that this will create a more sustainable future for the gaming space. I do like to own copies of games myself, and I think PlayStation will provide the means to do that for most third-party games. But as we move into a more and more digital era, digital ownership will also take on more forms. Emulation has already saved many gaming experiences, and I feel like we're just creating more of a shortcut to ROMs being the future of ownership. Companies like Nintendo and Sony will of course provide an option for collection of physical media. But ultimately, the simplification of things is where things will inevitably go. I think that Microsoft is making the only decision that makes sense for them to make at this point. If it means that Xbox is essentially a subscription service, then I'm here for it. They've essentially been that for the better part of a decade anyway, with services like Games with Gold and the backwards compatibility library. Consoles will become a more niche and independent endeavor, but exclusivity will become less of a thing. At the end of the day, what's best for the consumer is what's best, and making access to gaming less corporate as a whole is always a step in the right direction.